And we're back now with former Secretary of State Colin Powell. We want to talk a little politics and talk a little bit about this book that Dick Cheney himself said is going to cause heads all over Washington to explode. I guess I'd ask you, General, is your head exploding?
My head isn't exploding, and I haven't noticed any other heads exploding in Washington, D.C., and the explosive part of the book is what Mr. Cheney says is explosive, but from what I've read in the newspapers and seen on television, it's essentially a rehash of events of 7 or 8 years ago. What really sort of got my attention was this way in which he characterized it. It's going to cause heads to explode. That's quite a visual. And in fact, it's the kind of headline I would expect to come out of a gossip columnist, or the kind of headline you might see one of the supermarket tabloids write. It's not the kind of headline I would have expected to come from a former Vice President of the United States of America. Mr. Cheney has had a long and distinguished career, and I hope in his book that's what he will focus on, not these cheap shots that he's taking at me and other members of the administration who served to the best of our ability for President Bush.
So you just label them flatly cheap shots.
Well, yeah, they are cheap shots. I mean, several of the ones he tosses at me, you know, he takes great credit for my resignation in 2004. Well, President Bush and I had always agreed that I would leave at the end of 2004. After the election, I stayed on for 3 more months because I wanted to, and because there were some conferences that I wanted to attend, and because Dr. Rice hadn't been confirmed. So there's no news there. He says that I went out of my way not to present my positions to the president, but to take them outside of the administration. That's nonsense. The president knows that I told him what I thought about every issue of the day. Mr. Cheney may forget that I'm the one who said to President Bush, if you break it, you own it. And you have got to understand that if we have to go to war in Iraq, we have to be prepared for the whole war, not just the first phase. And Mr. Cheney and many of his colleagues did not prepare for what happened after the fall of Baghdad. And I persuaded the president to take the case to the United Nations to see if it could be solved without war. And if it couldn't be solved without war, we would have people aligned with us. Mr. Cheney went out immediately after the president made that decision and undercut it by giving 2 speeches to 2 veterans groups that essentially said he didn't believe it would work. That's not the way you support a president. Then he also says that I was not supportive of the president's positions. Well, who went to the United Nations? And regrettably, with a lot of false information, it was me, it wasn't Mr. Cheney. I supported the president. I support the president's decisions. I gave the president my best advice. And then he goes on to talk about the Valerie Plame affair, and this tries to lay it all off on Mr. Rich Armitage in the State Department and me. But the fact of the matter is, when Mr. Armitage realized that he was the source for Bob Novak's column that caused all the difficulty, and he called me immediately 2 days after the president launched the investigation. And what we did was we called the Justice Department. They sent over the FBI. The FBI had all the information about Mr. Armitage's participation in this immediately, and we called Al Gonzalez, the president's counsel, and told him that we had information. The FBI asked us not to share any of this with anyone else, as did Mr. Gonzalez. And so if the White House operatives had come forward as readily as Mr. Armitage had done, then we wouldn't have gone on for 2 more months with the FBI trying to find out what happened in the White House. There wouldn't have been a special counsel appointed by the Justice Department who spent 2 years trying to get to the bottom of it, and we wouldn't have had the mess that we subsequently had. And so if the White House and the operatives in the White House, on Mr. Cheney's staff and elsewhere in the White House, had been as forthcoming with the FBI as Mr. Armitage was, this problem would not have reached the dimensions that it reached. But Mr. Cheney is free to say what he wishes, but so far I haven't seen anything in it that is as explosive as he claims it is, and I don't see any heads laying on the street.
Well, do you think, I mean, it was no secret that you often disagreed with the vice president, as there are always disagreements within any administration.
And I think what Mr. Cheney should let us see is the nature of those disagreements. And he should say why he disagreed with me, and he should at least indicate why I was disagreeing with him, and not just dismiss it with a wave of his hand and a barb that is intended to cause heads to explode rather than to illuminate the issue.
I just want to put up on the screen that one quote because you referred to it. This is the quote, one of the quotes in the book, and he says flatly, talking about you, it was as though he thought the proper way to express his views was by criticizing administration policy to people outside the government.
Did he indicate anything in that paragraph or in that section about what I did? I gave my best advice to him, to my colleagues in the National Security Council, and above all to the President of the United States of America. And he can't dismiss all of that with that kind of observation.
What do you think happened here? I mean, clearly you had disagreements, but this seems, reading this book, this seems to go beyond disagreement. It seems to be anger here.
Well, I'm not going to attribute any emotion to Mr. Cheney in the writing of his book, but it was clear by 2004 that the team was not functioning as a team. And we had different views, and not just views that could be reconciled. And so I said to the president that I would be leaving at the end of the year after the election, and he ought to take a look at his whole team to try to resolve these issues, because it was not a smoothly functioning team at that point. And I think that's unfortunate, but it's the reality. And I felt that I had to leave the administration, and frankly, I always intended to just serve one term.
Did the conversations, I mean, the atmosphere within the White House while you were there, how would you characterize it? I mean, obviously there were disagreements, but were these angry disagreements? No. Because I know in some ways, he's no kinder to your successor, Condoleezza Rice.
Well, he's taken the same shots at Condi with an almost condescending tone. She tearfully did this or that. And he's taken the same shots at George Tenet, and he has also, in some ways, indicated he didn't always approve of what President Bush was deciding. And there's nothing wrong with saying you disagree, but it's not necessary to take these kind of barbs and then try to pump a book up by saying heads will be exploding. That's even on the headline section of the Nixon Foundation to sell the book. So I think it's a bit too far. I think Dick overshot the runway with that kind of comment, and if that's how he plans to sell his book. He's had a long and distinguished life and career, and I hope that's what the book focuses on, and not these kinds of things.
Well, I mean, but was there that kind of atmosphere while this administration was underway?
Did we have heated arguments? Sure. Did we have heated debates? Yes. But it was mostly civil. And everybody tends to focus on Iraq and Afghanistan. But there's so many other things that were going. The president's emergency plan on AIDS relief, the manner in which we increased funding for Africa and other parts of the world. We got a lot done in the administration, a lot of things that we can be proud and successful of, and that were successful. And we also got rid of a horrible regime called the Taliban and a horrible dictator by the name of Saddam Hussein.
Let me ask you a little bit about politics. You voted for Barack Obama last time out, even though you are a Republican. Are you going to vote for him again?
I haven't decided who I'm going to vote for. Just as was the case in 2008, I'm going to watch the campaign unfold. In the course of my life, I have voted for Democrats, I have voted for Republicans, I have changed from one four-year cycle to another, and I've always felt that it is my responsibility as a citizen to take a look at the issues, to examine the candidates, and pick the person that I think is best qualified for the office of the president in that year, and not just solely on the basis of party affiliation.
Anybody on the Republican side that has leaped up that you see as...
I think there are some interesting candidates, but I don't think any one of them has really emerged into the leading position. And if you follow the press and the polls, every 3 days, it's another leader on the Republican side. So let's see if anybody else is going to join, and we've got a long way to go.
All right. General Powell, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you
Bob.
so much for being with us today.